Okay, yeah. So, hi everybody. I'm Sophia Knight. I think I know most of you. I'm going to talk to you today about some of my research on logics for multi-agent systems for sort of game settings. And these are my real co-authors, but we're not really in Poland today. I used some old slides. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to start out giving you some background about the kind of systems we're looking at, some sort of interesting, understandable example problems. And I'm going to talk about some different logics that are used to analyze these systems. So some of this is other people's work that was done a while ago, and some of this is my new work, basically, is what we're going to go over today. And if you've got questions or you're curious about something at any point, feel free to stop me and ask. That's fine. So we're going to look at a simple example to start out with, just to understand the kind of systems we're looking at. So these are multi-agent, multi-state systems. That means there are a bunch of different people, computers, robots, whatever, interacting. And there are different possible states. So the system can kind of change states, move through the states as agents choose actions. So our simple example we're going to start out looking at is we're thinking about like there's like a circular track, and there are two robots pushing a cart around the track. The robots push in opposite directions. So they kind of push against each other if they're both pushing. And they're both equally strong. So if they both push, the cart just stays put. And each robot can either push or wait at any point in time. And just to keep things simple, we're just going to assume that there are 3 different zones in the track that they can be in, and they kind of move through it step by step. So if both robots push, you see they always stay in the same state. If both robots wait, they also stay in the same state. Nobody's moving the cart. And then if one robot pushes and the other robot waits, the cart moves sort of step by step around the track. And we write pairs of actions between states. It just represents what the first robot does, robot 1, and what robot 2 does. Make sense to everybody? Yeah.
For the Zoom, it's
Oh, is it?
yeah, I think it's just recording like.
Do you know how I fix it?
So I think it's just screen recording the wrong thing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder, okay, maybe because I shared the wrong thing. The window is gone.
I look so.
Yeah. I wonder if I should just use my iPad because that works, at least for class.
Works, yeah.
Yeah, let's just do that. Is it okay without video? Because it's sort of, I could try.
Yeah.
As long as we, yeah.
Like your computer's still.
Oh yeah, my computer's still in the meeting. Okay, perfect. So, okay, I'll use the audio on my computer. And just this for the screen share. Sound good?
Sure.
And Okay, sorry. That looks okay, right? And now I can share on Zoom.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so this isn't perfect for slides, sorry, but it'll work.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, yeah, so you understand the setting, 2 robots pushing a cart around a track, and we just, to kind of keep things simple, name the zones red, green, and blue. Imagine they're different colors. So the kind of question we're going to be thinking about today and analyzing with logic is what each of these agents can accomplish in this setting. So we can ask, what can each person or robot accomplish individually? And also, what can they accomplish if they cooperate and act together as a group? So we might wonder, starting from any point in the system, can robot 1 on their own be sure that the system eventually reaches the red state? So you think about that, and basically robot 2 can kind of always stop robot 1 from getting something done. If robot 2 just matches robot 1's actions, we're always stuck, right? So robot 1 has no way to be sure that the system eventually reaches the red state, unless maybe they start from the red state. But even then, robot 2 could make the system leave the red state if they kind of like choose a bad action from robot 1's perspective. So robot 1 can't be sure about that individually. But if we say we're starting, let's say we're starting from S1, for example, and we wonder, can robot 1 be sure that the system never reaches the red state? So they actually can, because if we're in the blue state and robot 1 always waits, and then if we get to the green state, robot 1 pushes, then no matter what robot 2 does, the system is not going to go into the red state. So this looks pretty simple, but it's a little bit more complicated than it seems. No robot can be sure that the system goes into a state, but robots can be sure that the system stays out of a state. Then you can wonder about what the 2 robots can do together. And if the 2 robots can cooperate and communicate and have the same goal, they can accomplish whatever they want. They can kind of control the whole system just by choosing the right sequence of actions. Any questions? Does this make sense? Okay. And then to make things more complicated and interesting, we can ask, what if the robots have imperfect information about the state of the system or the history of the system, where it was in the past? Then things become different, right? Have you seen imperfect information in like an AI class or something? Anybody seen that before? A little bit? Okay, yeah, some people. So imperfect information means you don't know exactly what state the system is in. You have some information maybe, but you don't know exactly what state. So a good example here would be if the agent is colorblind and can't tell the red state from the green state. So if they're in the blue state, they know that. But if they're in the red or green state, they don't know which of those 2 states they're in. So we'll talk more about how we formalize that and add it to the model later, and how it changes like what the agents can do. So the goal of this work is to develop a logic that analyzes the strategic abilities of the agents in multi-agent systems with imperfect information. So when I say a logic, I mean an exact formal language where you can express statements like robot one can't make the system go into the red state eventually, something like that. And you can decide whether those statements are true or false. You have an exact procedure to decide that. So we call these models concurrent game structures. This robot card example is a concurrent game structure. It means a multi-state, multi-agent system. And at each state, every agent chooses an action which updates the system to the next state. So this is a little bit different than like turn-based games, where at each state, one agent chooses an action, and then later on a different agent gets to choose. Instead, we say at every step, everybody takes an action. And the really interesting setting is concurrent game structures with imperfect information. So some agents don't know exactly what state they're in. They just have partial information about the state. And sometimes I talk about states here, sometimes I talk about histories. That's another interesting difference, like whether you remember everything that happened in the past or whether you just know where you are right now. And I'm gonna kind of formally define a few things before we talk about the logic. So first of all, we're gonna talk about strategies. And a strategy is going to be a function that takes the history of the system, so the path of states that it's taken so far up till now, and gives each agent an action that they take. So this would be something like, if we've been in the red state twice, then agent one will push, something like that. Yeah, always push would be another strategy for an agent. Always wait in the red state, otherwise push, something like that. So when we talked about agent one can keep the system out of the red state, that was using a certain strategy, push in one state, wait in the other state. And then in these systems, we set them up so that if you have one starting state and you have a strategy for each agent, that gives you a single history of the system. So these systems are sort of deterministic. It's not like you start here, and if both agents push, it might go here or it might go here. Instead, if every agent chooses an action, it gives you exactly one next state. So that means if you have a single starting state and you have a strategy for each agent, the outcome of the game is totally determined. The whole outcome of the game. So here's an example of a history: S0, push, push, S0, push, wait, S2, which is like the sequence of states and actions the system goes through. But if you only have a strategy for some of your agents, not all of them, that kind of gives you a tree of different things that can happen through your system instead of just a single path through your system. That's called non-determinism. Okay, and then the way we model imperfect information in these settings is kind of interesting. We use what's called an equivalence relation. So that if you remember discrete math, that's a reflexive, symmetric, transitive relation. Basically what it does is it divides the set of states up into a few different equivalence classes, we call them. So it kind of splits the set of states up into subsets. And each of those subsets are a bunch of states that the agent can't distinguish, can't tell apart. So for example, in that earlier one, red and green was one equivalence class, and then blue was another. Yeah, here we go. And in the picture, we do this like squiggly line thing. So this means agent one can't tell the difference between those two states. They're indistinguishable. So then we talked about strategies, but when you have a strategy on a system with imperfect information, it's important to take the imperfect information into account in your strategy. So whenever we have two histories that are indistinguishable for an agent, we say the strategy assigns the agent the same action at those two histories. So that means that the agent's action that they choose or their strategy has to be based on their knowledge. So the point here is that if agent 1 is colorblind and can't distinguish the red state from the green state, we don't consider a strategy where they push in the red state and wait in the green state or something like that. They don't know which state they're in, so they have to choose the same action at both of those states. That's what a uniform strategy means. So they could push at both S0 and S2. They can't choose two different actions at those two states. So now we'll quickly go into one kind of formal logic for these systems. This is called ATL, alternating time temporal logic. And it describes strategic abilities in concurrent game structures. So we have operators, we have propositions, first of all. Those are just facts that are true or false at each state. Regular logical operators, not and. And then these are the three new interesting operators. So in these formulas, A is going to be a group of agents, and phi is just going to be a standard formula. So X means next. So diamond A X phi says group A has a joint strategy that they can take together that will make the formula phi true at the next step. And then we have a box operator that means always. So this means group A has a strategy that will make phi always true now and forever in the future. And then we have an until operator. So group A can, phi 1 is true now, and they can keep phi 1 true until phi 2 becomes true. So here are some examples of formulas in that same system. So this is the state that we consider. So we're looking at starting from state S0. And this says agent 1 can make not green true at the next step. So that's true. That's almost the same as that other formula we talked about. Agent 1 can kind of prevent green from being true at the next step. But agent 1 can't make red true at the next step because agent 2 can sort of block them, basically. Agent 1 and 2 can keep red true forever if they cooperate. Then you can have more interesting formulas with like nesting and stuff. Like this last one says, it's not true that agent 1 can keep blue true forever or keep green true forever. But it is true that agent 1 can keep blue or green true forever. So like the second formula, you'd have to either have a path that stayed blue forever or a path that stayed green forever. This one here, it's okay to have a path that goes back and forth between blue and green. So you use nesting to express some more complicated properties. This is the semantics. I'm not really going to get into this, but this is sort of how you look at a system and look at a formula, and you can exactly decide whether a formula is true in a system. This gets pretty complicated to try to do by hand, but you can have a model checking algorithm that you implement and you feed it a system and a formula and it says yes or no. And then everything I talked about so far was about perfect information. It's more interesting when you have imperfect information, some kind of knowledge, basically. And there are two major issues that come up here. First of all, you need to think about what the agent knows about the starting state of the system. So if they can't tell red from green, they shouldn't be able to choose a different strategy starting from red than they chose starting from green. If they want to achieve a goal, it should work both from red and from green. And then the second question is whether the agent's strategy is uniform, like we talked about. So they choose their actions based on what they know about where they are now. So if we have imperfect information, we'd say starting from S0, agent 1 can't make blue true at the next state. No, can't make blue false at the next state because they don't know whether they're in red or green. So they don't know basically whether to push or wait if they want to prevent blue from coming true. If they had perfect information though, they could prevent blue from coming true. Does that make sense, that difference? Okay. Okay, so everything I've talked about so far actually isn't my work, it's stuff other people have done. I'm going to give you a quick summary of some issues I've worked on with these same kind of systems and questions. So everything we've talked about so far is whether agents can be guaranteed to achieve a goal, so if they can definitely achieve a goal. And something I've been looking at over the last year or so is, what about like more realistic situations where you can never be sure that you're going to achieve a goal, but you do have a best guess of how to achieve that goal? So one example of that would be if you're playing a 2-player card game, and each person has 2 cards. You can see one, the other one is face down. You win if you beat both of your opponent's cards. And you've got some cards you can choose from to play. So let's say your opponent plays, you see that they have a jack and they have a hidden card. And your highest card in your hand is a queen. You want to beat both your opponent's cards. You don't know what their hidden card is. So if we were looking at sort of traditional ATL, they'd just say you don't have a strategy, you can't do it, you've got no way to win. Because if they have a king, you can't be sure you win. So you don't have a path that definitely gets you to the winning state. But I think that's a little bit unreasonable, because obviously, like, you do know what you should do, you just don't know that you can be sure to win by doing it. Obviously, you should play the queen. It's your only hope of winning. And there's no situation where playing the queen is worse than another choice, right? So this is a little bit of an oversight in logics of multi-agent systems, especially if you're thinking about kind of realistic situations like a self-driving car, something like that. Like a self-driving car, you almost can't guarantee anything. Like you would never be able to prove that your self-driving car won't get into an accident, right? But you might be able to prove that like your self-driving car always does the best thing to not get into an accident. It always makes the best choice. It can't control what other people do, so it can't be sure it will work, but it always makes the best choice. So this is a really important kind of property to be able to analyze. So I'm not going to go into the formal parts of this too much, because it's actually quite a bit more complicated than the logic of guaranteeing outcomes. But let's look at another example really quick. So this is sort of more real life. You've got a final in 2 hours. You want to get an A on it. You don't know exactly what's on the final, so you don't have a strategy to get an A on the final. If you knew what was on the final, you could like Google it, figure out all the answers and get an A for sure. But you don't know what's on the final, you've got imperfect information about the situation. So you don't have a winning strategy. But you do know that if you spend the next 2 hours studying, it's not going to make your grade on the final worse, right? It basically, it dominates any other choice of action you could take. That's a term from game theory. It's like it's your best possible choice. And one important thing here is that we're not talking about probability at all. That's just a whole different issue. What we're talking about is like, no matter what's on the final, studying for 2 hours is like, if there is a way to get an A, that's it. It's not going to make you not get an A in some weird situation. So that's what a dominant strategy means. So this took a while, but eventually we came up with a logical definition of doing your best, not necessarily guaranteeing that you reach a goal, but doing your best to reach it. And this is in partial information settings. So you have imperfect information about the state. And we have 3 kind of formulas here. So we have this, where A is an agent and phi is a formula. So KA phi means agent A knows formula phi right now. They know that formula phi is true. So what that means is formula phi is true at every state they consider possible. That's how we define knowledge in these systems. And then we have a second operator, which is like the ones we looked at earlier. This is called seeing to it. It's some other people named it that a while ago, but basically guaranteeing that phi will become true. So agent A has a strategy to be sure phi will become true. And then our third modality, it's called our third operator, means agent A can do their best to make phi become true. So this is what we were talking about with like playing the queen or studying for 2 hours. We can define this logically in the systems as having a dominant strategy. And just as a couple more examples of these formulas, if you're playing rock, paper, scissors, and phi means winning, you have no way to do your best to win. There's no action you can choose that's like not going to be the worst action in some situation, right? No matter what you do, it might be worse depending on what the other person does. But if we're playing that 2-player card game we described earlier, you do have a way to do your best to win. Even though you can't guarantee that you win, playing the queen is doing your best. Anybody here taken game theory or anything like that? No? Okay. So there's this game called Chomp. It's like 2 players are like taking bites out of a chocolate bar, and whoever I think eats the last square, I think loses. So it's kind of like a game theory example. And there is a winning strategy where you can definitely be sure you don't eat the last bite of the chocolate bar in Chomp if you're the player who plays first. So that's an example of seeing to it that you win. We don't really have like real examples of games where you see to it that you win because they're not very interesting. So Chomp is from game theory. And then this is just a little bit of like sort of other stuff, comparing this to other work. But basically like this is about how sure you can be that you'll achieve your goal. So if you use non-uniform strategies, that's a little bit like you're like God or something. You have like extra information about the situation and you can achieve lots of things. And then you have different levels from there, basically, depending on how powerful your strategies are and what you can do. And this is the least powerful. And then this one here with the question mark is the new kind of logic I talked about today, a logic of doing your best. And that's about it for today. Yeah, I'm still working on this. I like this topic. If anybody's interested, like there could be some good Europe questions in there or something like that. So yeah, I can send you the paper or we can talk about it more, whatever.